Do you think that it's important, if you could talk a little bit about the Magdalene laundries, because Americans don't actually realize that a lot of what happened has historical resonance and pain associated with it?
Yeah, so Magdalene laundries were real things. So these were church-run, for-profit, forced labour camps, basically, where women who, for really any reason, there were women who were put into these because all you needed was a male member of your family to say, take her away, that's it. You didn't actually have to have done anything. There were women who ended up in these places because they were very pretty and considered to be a risk of, maybe promiscuity or rape or something like that. There were women who were single mothers who got pregnant out of wedlock, all kinds of things. But anyway, many women lived their whole lives practically in these places and had their lives totally destroyed, washing sheets every day to make penance. It was very hard physical labour. Big massive sheets for hotels and hospitals. The church were making money hand over fist. They didn't get any of it. They also made the game Mousetrap for Hasbro. So in the UK, they were manufacturing this like a factory. So they were putting all the parts together. Probably not for the States, but in the UK, that's where they were being made. So they were like forced labour camps.
And
the last one closed in 1997. So we're not talking about really ancient history. There are women alive today who are 40 who were in these places.
And one of the things that I find the end of the film, I almost get distracted because I'm so traumatized post-birth, and then the finding of the child graves, that I just kind of like sit and reel for the end of the film. But I think it's important for everyone to realize that they found mass graves of babies. That is something that resonates very strongly, and it's not a moment of just
it's not just a horror thing. It really happened. So in Galway, a couple of kids were playing. I think it was in the 70s, and they came across like an entry to an underground pit that when it was they saw skeletons and it was dug out. It turns out there were 796 dead babies in there, and children, and nobody knows exactly what happened to these kids. They're still investigating it. So the church, it's right underneath a Magdalene laundry, or right beside a Magdalene laundry, and the church are saying, oh, it could have been a famine graveyard. It's like, it's probably not the only case of something like that. So yeah, there's a lot of historic trauma associated with these places.
So then it becomes really interesting to me, too, the way that demonic possession gets folded in. Because for one stage for me, I just think that the text itself is horrific enough. Mm-hmm. And would you speak a little bit about how you manage the demonic possession storyline?
Yeah, that was tricky, right? So I said earlier at the talk that you were at, and some of you, I think, were there, that this film, how it came about was the producer came to me and he had basically a 2-line idea, and that was, I want to make he didn't know, no script, nothing. I want to make a found footage horror film set in a Magdalene laundry. And also, I keep forgetting, the other element was he wanted a possession. So I thought, this sounds really problematic. If this is not handled very delicately, if you have a possessed girl in a Magdalene laundry, and because possession tropes are already kind of problematic in what they say about female sexuality, and because these places were places where women were imprisoned very often for expressing any kind of sexual desire or anything like that, I just thought you could go to a really bad place with that. So I felt that it was one of the things that they insisted on. So I thought, if we're going to have a girl and she's possessed, I want to play it a certain way. So she's ambiguous to me. She's not like a standard possessed girl. I see her as kind of a Virgin Mary analogue. So which is interesting because the Virgin Mary was a woman who got pregnant to someone, i.e. God, who was not her husband. So she's analogous to the women who were in Magdalene laundries who were punished for for conceiving in the wrong circumstances, but yet they were treated so brutally, but the Virgin Mary is held up so high by the Catholic Church that I thought there was an interesting interplay in that. So yeah, that was kind of how I navigated that territory. It was important to me that she was I think she's a good, pure soul, but she's assailed by dark forces because she's so good, rather than her being bad and therefore attracting evil.
Yeah, so building off of that, you just mentioned that there's a problematic that can come up with the sexualization. I think that you handled actually avoiding the sexualization so well throughout the whole entire film. And that it's often done by not letting us see things. And how much of that were you deliberately trying to resist sort of that sadistic, sexualizing gaze of horror?
Very consciously. And some of those battles were very hard won. There was pressure on me to sexualize the Kathleen character, who was written as 14. There was a lot of problems with that. There was pressure on me, even costume-wise, to make her to be a bit more revealing, which to me is just, I was deeply uncomfortable with that. I was not going to play that game. I think she represents so many women who had their lives destroyed in these places and who were brutalised, and I don't want her to be an object of something to look at and take sexual pleasure from, you know? So it was important to me that she was empathised with as a human being, and that's why the birth scene in particular is shot the way it is.
That scene is amazing.
Oh, thank you. It's my favourite one, and again I had to fight for that because the standard thing to do is you get a lot of, coverage of people think they want to see the violence and the degradation, and the actual violence and degradation is first of all not really what I want you to focus on. I want you to focus on her experience of it, not your vicarious experience of it. And I think we see so much of that it just washes over, and the audience, you can see people watch violence like that and degradation and they just gloss over. It washes over them. They're not actually paying attention to the moment. It's just this assault of gore and blood, and I wanted to not give the audience that, so that they have to engage with her face and think about her and not to give a way out of that.
The first time I saw it, it brought me to tears. Like I felt that she was challenging us to face this history of forced births and the process that, and you corrected me even at the time, because in America, again, we're not that familiar with the procedure that was actually being done on her.
Yes, well, if I had have had my way, it would have been more obvious. There's a conversation with the doctor that was longer where he explains the procedure. So it's this procedure called symphysiotomy, which was pretty common right up until even the 80s. I think they were still doing it. And the only reason that they did it was purely for ideological reasons. There was no health reason at all to do this, and it left women crippled for life. So basically, rather than give a woman a cesarean section, my mum has friends who have many difficulties because of this procedure. If they're having a baby and the pelvis is too small, rather than giving them a cesarean section like they would in most places, and that they were capable of doing, it's not a third world country, they would sever the tendon in the pelvic bone and open up like two turkey legs, open up the pelvis so that the baby could be taken out. And it's an extremely barbaric procedure, which is illegal in many parts of the world. And as I say, there are women who still live with the difficulties of that. So that's what's happening to her in that scene.
It's interesting as well, because this comes out right around the time that the abortion debate is happening in Ireland. Abortion has been illegal in the Republic forever,
and it's still illegal in the North.
It's still illegal in the North.
Yeah, and that's illegal in any circumstances, so it doesn't matter if your life is in danger, you can have an abortion, but in practice many doctors are afraid to perform the procedure in case they get in trouble and someone legislates against them or something, but or sues them. But yeah, so it premiered the first time it was seen in the public at all. It was at the Seattle International Film Festival last May, and it was the same day as the abortion referendum results were coming out. So, or that vote happened. So we went into the theatre, we kind of didn't know which way, and it could have went either way. But when we came out after the screening, it was very much leaning towards repealing that law so that abortion could happen in the Republic of Ireland. So that was really strange kind of timing.
Yeah, and it's interesting for here, as we're moving more and more towards Roe v. Wade getting repealed, that these kind of arguments, it's interesting to see them set in 1960, but having a lot of reverberations to the present as well. The same sort of fears about choosing the child over the mother, and without even a pause, which is what we see here.
Yes, yeah, scary times.
Yeah. And so I'll open this up after this one question, but I did want, if you could talk a little bit about your decision to do 16 millimeter, because I think that the materiality of the film and the way that you handle the images and the soundtrack are really remarkable and affective for me, especially since we're more used to found footage horror films now, and you find a number of ways to bring jump scares that we don't anticipate. And I think it's partially because of the 16 millimeter and the sound.
Yeah, I think because, well, we were going to make as I say, it started before I was even part of the project. It was going to be sorry, I'm really jet lagged. It was going to be a found footage film. So I thought that was, when the producer came to me and said, I'd like to do this, he was also speaking to other directors. He was seeing who he wanted to hire, basically. And I just thought, if you were going to do that, I think you need to handle it very carefully, not just the possession thing, not just the subject matter, but also aesthetically, because there's so much found footage material, because it's cheap and easy to produce, and many first-time filmmakers make it because of that reason, that it could just get lost in the swamp of some good and many bad found footage films. So I felt that it should be separated from them aesthetically to make it more interesting as well. So given that I thought we should set it in 1960, 16 millimeter seemed it seemed like what they would have used if they were really going to do this at the time. So I was looking at, I like to go outside of the films that my films would be put into the category of. I like to look outside of those altogether when I'm thinking about references, rather than looking at the other films. I've seen all those films a lot. I love the Blair Witch Project, but that was not relevant to this. I was going somewhere outside of that, and that's just what I like to do. So I was looking at cinema verite of the early 60s, particularly the Maisels brothers. I see the younger priest as being, he would have been a documentarian. Many priests have a thing that they're really good at, a hobby thing, and I think that's his thing. And for that reason, it made sense to shoot it on 16 millimeter. And yeah, I don't know, we didn't shoot all of it on 16. Certain things had to be shot digitally for practical reasons, but I felt that the texture of it, particularly in daylight or that kind of thing, wasn't really, you had to have it, you know. I think if, I would notice if it wasn't there.
Questions?
Hi there, my name is Liam, I'm a film student here. I thought that the image, the sound was all very effective, but I was wondering if you could speak more to like those transitionary bits, like where the celluloid was all burnt, where it was all flared. That was also really stylish, really effective. Like, how'd you do that?
Well, there was one thing that we came up with, myself and Ryan, the DP, and that was the lens change kind of thing. The reason for that was because if this was a real, like a Maisels Brothers type documentary at the time, they just do a talking head. It's for purely informational purposes, and if it's a documentary, you don't really repeat yourself. You know, you just say the thing, so you don't get to do different you don't get to do a close-up and, you know, that kind of thing. You have it set. But if you have a lens change, you can go in, you can move in, you know. So that allowed us to do that, but mostly it also allowed you to cut between takes without it being like you'd cut between the take necessarily. So it was a useful device at times. There's also times where it just stops suddenly for reasons of pacing and timing, or just because it felt right at the time. In the birth scene, it's the film runs out. That's the only time that happens. It's just it runs out of film. I think a lot of that, some of it was practical, a lot of it was aesthetic, just in post-production in the edit. Stuff that felt nice for timing and pacing reasons. And because we were making found footage and it's allowed to be, and it's found footage film, it's allowed to be tactile and messy and not totally perfect, which works to our benefit. And in the scene where the girl gets slapped in the laundry, I like the warping of that, because it's the first moment that we see kind of behind the scenes of what this place is really like. So for the same reason, it's important that she's singing "If You're Irish, Come Into the Parlour." You know, it's the Irish are romanticised a lot, and particularly in America. But we've got so much heavy baggage like this that only now we're starting to say, "Hey, this is a big part of who we are." You know, so don't know if I'm off track there, but I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
This is not as much as a question as a compliment, actually. Because I am quite a fan of horror films, but I'm seeing a trend lately, especially nowadays, that people walk into the theaters to watch them sometimes in a pretty inappropriate comparison for a reason similar to the people watching pornographies. They are for the sensational stimulation. But this film you made is the storyline, is the point. And it's really one that makes you think. You have a father who is in doubt about his faith, his belief. And he was supposed to investigate a miracle, which could turn him around. But the truth is actually the one that pushes him further. So this structure is very impressive, honestly. And it's not something you see, definitely not every day, not even every year. And this is a film that leaves you thinking. But although to be fair, my eardrums are half gone, and I'm still seeing flashes sometimes. By the way, jump scares, cheap shot, man. But it's really impressive, and thank you very much for this film.
Thank you very much, I appreciate that.
Oh, I would second the compliment, but I have some very naive questions to ask you. The first is, how much interaction is there between you and Galway and the filmmaking? Because this past year, we got to see some of the stuff that people are doing in the community. Mm-hmm. And how much involvement do you have, or what's your base of interaction?
With Galway?
Yeah, well, or between the two, between Galway and...
Well, if I'm in Galway, it's mostly for a spin, because it's a nice place to visit. I was at the film fla with this film.
Did you?
Whenever that was, April, I think.
Really?
Yeah. It's nice, I love Galway, but in terms of the film community there, I haven't really engaged with that very much yet. We're kind of, Ireland's very, I think it's like that everywhere, you know, you've got your little enclave of filmy people in New York, and you've got your massive enclave of people in LA and different places. So the north kind of has its own little thing happening at the minute, and if I'm going to Galway, it's kind of outside of that, you know.
Well, the question I really want to ask is about the Mother Superior. Casting a part like that and creating. Now, you spoke very eloquently about being very concerned about the young females and the magic and the up-to-do. And what did you learn about how these women are positioned so to speak, to do the kind of thing. I saw the Magdalene, I've read horror stories and detectives, etc. But what kind of, was it just merely a sense of having to invest themselves in this position, or was
Well,
it?
I think it's, I think nuns are interesting characters, and
Yes.
to some extent they've been less accessible to us than priests who speak. We hear them speak all the time. There's, you know, their voices at the forefront in the Catholic Church. I mean, in terms of on the ground, on a local level. Nuns, we don't really hear anything from. You very rarely have a conversation with a nun. So I was interested in, I felt I was skating a very particular line with this film. There's been a lot of demonization of priests, and there are a lot of bad priests, but not all priests are bad, obviously. I felt like it would be an easy, lazy thing to do, to make it like bad priests. I also didn't want to excuse the church, but I think it's not really the church, it was the church state as an apparatus working together that created these systems in which these things could happen, and that made it so labyrinthine and difficult for someone who was a good person to rail against. It wasn't a couple of bad actors, it was a labyrinth, an apparatus, as I say. So I think in this film, and we have a good nun in this film too, the nun who has, you know, I don't want to say these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, I try not to do that. But she is obviously the bad guy in this film. But she's also a complex character who we understand to some extent her frustration with being nuns in the Catholic Church carry so much weight and are given so little credit and have so little power, but in terms of women at that time, they had more power than many other women.
Yes.
And I mean, power corrupts, and that's a big part of this, that power corrupts. So I think she represents some of the different shades within that, you know, and I don't really know any nuns.
I think it comes across that it's part of the whole, if I use the pun, a matrix of all of it that interacts. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
My question was about the young priest and his performance specifically. And one thing that I would be curious to hear you talk about is how you directed him during the more sophisticatedly choreographed scenes. So I'm wondering does he become the camera operator, or does someone else come in and replace him? Does he follow the actual camera?
Yeah, that's an interesting question actually. So basically, the vast majority, Kieran Flynn, who plays the younger priest, was on set every day, waiting in the dressing room, reading his books, waiting to be called. And he's very rarely in it really. You hear him a lot more. A lot of his job was in audio post-production. So that is always Ryan, the DP. So Ryan wore the frock, he wore that so if you catch sight of, you know, the ground, you'd see he was wearing the same shoes and wearing the costume and running around the corridors, climbing through underground tunnels and everything. So that's all Ryan. Kieran never touched the camera.
But he's still following the DP around and like huffing and puffing, or is that
That's a big question.
16 millimeter, and sound is recorded completely separately.
So that was post-production. So making into an ADR studio, and we watched the film together, and I'm like, right, this is what's happening here, Kieran, and then he would just do his breathing and stuff, you know. Yeah, I think no one's ever asked that before, but it's never him behind the camera.
Thank you.
Can I cheat again and ask two questions? But first, I wonder if you could tell us about the spaces that you used to film it. I'm very curious about the locations. Were these filmed in the same location? Where did you find those catacombs? What was it like to shoot in the catacombs? And then also, I've heard you talk a lot over the course of the day about how important it is for a director to fight to keep things in the film that are important for them. So I'm wondering if in this film you can think of an example of something that you had to fight for to keep in, and why it was important to keep that, why it was important to you and your vision to keep that thing in the film.
Okay. Well, to address your first question, there were 3 locations that are stitched together. So one was formerly private home of Lord Craigavon, hadn't been lived in since the 1930s. It had been used as a hospital during the war. Very creepy place. Just extraordinarily, I don't know, strange place. Actually, the day after we left that shoot, the roof fell in, and we were supposed to still be there, so everyone was like, oh, it's a curse. But not a very effective curse because we weren't there. But anyway, so there was that place. Then for the laundry sections, that was an old linen mill, not far from where I live actually, a Victorian linen mill. So it had big space and it had some of the machinery that you would have for big bolts of material. And it had been used for parts of the Frankenstein Chronicles, and I think maybe some of Penny Dreadful was shot there as well. So yeah, a really interesting spot. And then the underground tunnels, there were some underneath Lord Craigavon's house. So the start of that is under his house. I don't know what that was for. We found those kind of where they're in the room and he pulls something off the wall and there's the start of the tunnel. That was actually part of a tunnel in there, and it went in through the walls. It might have been some kind of archaic heating system or something, I don't know. And then there were underground mines of some kind in the middle of the countryside that I don't really know what the purpose of them was, but our location manager, who's also the art director, just knows everywhere in Northern Ireland. He knows exactly where everything is. It's like he's gone over with a fine-tooth comb, so he's like, I know where there are some tunnels. That's where that came from. And then to your question about holding on to something in the film, so I think probably it kind of ties into the one thing. One thing was that the integrity, I did not want to demonize the women who suffered in these places. That was really important, and it would have been very easy to do that, and I had to fight hard not to. And that ties in with the birth theme, which from the very beginning, before there was any script, I was like, I want to do this scene and it's like this. And there was pressure on me to get coverage, shoot it different ways. And I was like, no, it has to be done like this. So there are certain things you concede or that you compromise on, but that was something that was the red line on. It is going to be like this and that is it. But then when we were actually shooting it, the producer came over to me and said, actually, Aisling, I think this is really powerful. I think you did the right thing. And now they all like it. They're all happy with it now. So I explained this. I think I was talking to these young ladies over here earlier on today about the question that you asked me was about advice for young filmmakers, for young female filmmakers in particular. And my advice, which ties into this, is that if you're a director, what you have, the nebulous kind of to other people, the sense of the film, which isn't a concrete thing yet. It's an idea, it's a feeling, it's something that you have in your head that I liken to a helium balloon. It's an invisible helium balloon. You're the only person who knows it's there. You know exactly what it's like. Nobody else does. So you have to cling on to that or else it'll disappear. So especially if you're doing something that's a little bit idiosyncratic or unexpected, that's when you really need to dig your heels in. If other people don't get it, you need to stick with what you're doing and be true to your sense of what this film is, because you're the only one, and until it's on the screen, nobody else knows what it is. So you have to just hold on to that.
Hi. You mentioned an extended version of the scene with the doctor where he was describing the procedure. Is there any other material that you wish you could have included in the movie but didn't have an opportunity to?
Yeah, I think actually there are a few things that are I think if I was to do a director's cut, it would be a longer film, it'd be a bit longer, you know, there's probably about at least 15 minutes probably of stuff that I would like to include. And I did a director's cut before this cut and had to, you know, give ground on some things. But yeah, there's some stuff that I miss. I think the birth scene could be longer. I had it even longer, and yeah, but we pulled back on it a bit in the end. I'm trying to remember what else there was. There's the the scene with the doctor is longer, there's more information in it, and Charlie gives such a good performance in that scene, I think. I miss that, and I think because the symphysiotomy is actually important, I miss it not being there. It was kind of like funny actually, the only reason that it's like a Hitchcock cameo that I have. It wasn't for egotistical reasons, it was because I just had this idea that I wanted to see a nun smoking a cigarette, and I was the only person who could do it at that time, so I said I'll just hop into the costume kit. And so there's me and a couple of other nuns, and we're just like having a fag, you know? And I really, I kind of missed that. It was like a background kind of shot that was part of just the colour of the place. You know, there's some stuff like that that's just about things that he picked up while he's still a documentarian that are, you know, just colour of the convent kind of things. I miss those things a bit. So yeah, there is some stuff, yeah. Thank you.
In our cult class, we've been talking a lot about marketing. And so I'm just curious, because I know this was a day and date release in America, at least. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And were you happy with that decision? Do you think that it broadened your audience base? Were you pleased, or anything that you could speak to about the marketing that ended up happening?
Well, I think, you know, when it comes to the States, I'm given that, because every film is kind of, I can't remember who it is that said, I recently heard this, that it's kind of like giving birth. There's pain involved in producing something like that, and to some extent you think maybe it'll never get out, nobody's ever going to see this film. We're never going to agree about certain things that we don't agree on and all that. So then when it got picked up really quickly after it was finished, it was a few weeks later, IFC picked it up. First of all, it was massively exciting, and just to think it was even going to get out at all. And in terms of how, I think they have handled it really well in the States. I think how it's been marketed elsewhere has not been as successful. It hasn't been as well handled, and certainly they've always taken care of me and of the team as filmmakers, and they've been extremely respectful and just lovely to work with. So my experience in the States has been so much better than my experience in some other places that I'm inclined to look fondly on all of it. And I mean, for a first-time feature, I think it's pretty respectable to have gotten out in that way, so yeah.
Yeah, of course, I was pleased whenever it was day and date, because in limited release, it can take a long time to hit all of the many cities, but I was able to rent it on the day that it came out from IFC, and they did a lot of push on Twitter and online in like the weeks building up.
Yeah, I think they're pretty good at that kind of thing, and as I say, they've been really supportive, and they, you know, sent me massive posters and everything, because I just really like the poster. No, they're good guys, really. I have nothing bad to say about them at all. I've really enjoyed my experience with them.
This is so scary. I really appreciate that you didn't sexualize the characters throughout it, because I just watched The Devils the other day, and so now I need to like have a cleanse of Catholic iconography. But I wanted to ask what you're working on next.
Thank you very much. And actually, you mentioned The Devils, and that just reminded me of something about your question. I did have a scene that I really loved towards the end of a nun crawling down the stairs, but not like in a scuttling supernatural. She was just, it's just weird. Like, why is she doing that? And she's smiling and she's on all fours. And I thought it was fabulously creepy. But the producer was like, but why is she doing that? Do you want to speed her up and make her like supernatural? I was like, no, she's just crawling down the stairs. He just couldn't get it, but I still think it would be at home there. But anyway, what was your actual question? Sorry. Oh, what am I working on next? Well, I'm attached to a couple of things that other people have written, but I have 2 projects that are my own, and one of them is called Godmother, 2 words, not one. It's a folk horror film. It's got another kind of unexplained pregnancy. I don't know, that's just where I go with things, I don't know. And it's kind of, I don't know if you've seen The Wicker Man, some people, it's got little elements of that. It's Irish folk horror, which weirdly there hasn't been very much of, given how weird and strange the Irish are, and we have a lot of material there to work with. So that's one, and it's in kind of a good place. I'd be hopeful to think that that might happen. And then I have another project called Rainy Days, which has been optioned by Fantastic Films, who produced Corin Hardy's first film, The Hollow. So that's kind of promising as well. So I'm not sure which one. It depends on who gets the finance, you know, but one or the other, I should hope. Horror films, anyway.
Do you like to work primarily in horror? Are you interested in other genres?
Well, yeah, as I said earlier, I studied film. I did a master's in film as well. And I wouldn't say, I love horror, but I would never say I'm only going to make horror films. I think, I don't know, it feels like that'd be a weird thing to do, really. But I tend to veer towards the dark side, and I don't do a lot of light stuff. Lots of fun at parties, you know. But for the foreseeable, that's kind of what I'm doing. But I've written a crime thriller TV pilot and Bible that's been picked up as well. So that could happen too, I don't know. But yeah, there's dead people in everything I write.
Is Northern Ireland Screen, are they, I know that Board's Gone on Aaron has a push right now for female creators, directors, writers. Is Northern Ireland Screen doing something similar, or are you just out there trying to tear everything down yourself?
Well, it was Boards Gone on Aaron, or Screen Ireland as they've more helpfully called themselves now. They changed their name recently. They're funding Rainy Days, which is a Fantastic Films. And then, because I'm from the border, so I've one leg either side, and one in the south, one in the north, so which has been useful for the first time in my life. But Northern Ireland Screen, what were you asking me about Northern Ireland Screen?
Are they going to, are they going to have an issue?
About like gender equality kind of. As with the abortion debate, Northern Ireland's always a little bit behind. You know, they don't quite get the memo at the same time, and it's taken them a while to get around to that, but recently they have started to talk about that a bit. I'm the first woman in Northern Ireland to ever have written and directed a film, a horror film. I think there was one woman 20 years ago who made a feature, kind of self-funded feature, but really there aren't many of us knocking around in Northern Ireland, you know, female filmmakers. So, but there are more now. And I think they are at least starting to think about those issues now.
Yes, the previous question from the audience was about Catholic iconography, and I was wondering if you had actually had any official Catholic consultant for this film. I didn't notice any at the end. There were some rather interesting things that were not in there. The center of any Catholic community is the Catholic Mass, and that is nowhere to be mentioned. The Black Mass is in there, but not the actual Catholic Mass. And you have the two priests in there, and it's a rule in the Catholic Church that a priest is supposed to celebrate Mass every day, and they don't. They're not shown that. Is there sort of an interesting sense in which this isn't even a Catholic film?
Well, actually, in the script, they did celebrate Mass, but we never saw it. I didn't want to show that. But Father Riley was giving Mass in the film. You just don't see it. The other priest doesn't document it because it's not interesting to the film he's making. He's making a film about the miraculous supposed happenings. He's not documenting everything, and that's just a daily thing that's happening. In terms of there being someone to consult, I mean, like, half of the crew and myself were all born and raised Catholic and very much like right in there, and many of them practicing Catholics as well. So it was really around that, you know. I didn't bring in someone especially to do that, because this is our lives. I mean, and in Ireland, Catholicism is ubiquitous. Priests are everywhere. You know, people see this film and they compare it to The Exorcist because there's some obvious comparisons. There's a possessed girl, but in terms of two priests hanging around, sure, they're everywhere in Ireland. You know, like every wedding you go to, there's a couple of priests there having a few whiskies, and they're an ordinary part of our life. the first house I ever lived in was a former priest's house, a parochial house, where I got for years, it was so interesting to me, I got catalogues. I didn't know priests got catalogues, so they could pick out, you know, their vestments for next season, you know, their chalice. I like this one, yeah, you know. And the people who make the wine, it's actually called Fruit of the Vine, the company that makes the wine. Fascinating to me. But yeah, that was just stuff that we knew. But I don't have every element of that in there because it's not relevant necessarily to the film that he's making, if you know what I mean. But I think to me, it is a Catholic film. As I say, I'm a Catholic. My dad was dying at the time that I was writing this film, and he died just before we went in to shoot it, and it's dedicated to him. And a lot of the things that Father Riley is struggling with are things that my dad struggled with. So he actually used to deliver bread to Magdalene Laundry, so he was in there all the time. And the nuns used to send home chicken sandwiches for me because they knew it was Saturday morning, I'd be up early watching cartoons and my mum mightn't be up yet, so they would send me home chicken sandwiches, you know. So I don't know, that's just all very much part of the fabric of our lives in Ireland.
John, and then this will be our last question.
Somebody else has it.
We can do two more. We'll do John and then Audrey.
Just to build off of what he just said, have you faced any criticism or pushback based on the content of this film? Have you know, from the church or from people otherwise, have people found especially in Ireland, the content of the film objectionable in any way?
I was fully prepared for that to happen, and particularly when we went to the Galway Film Fleadh, I thought this is because there was Magdalene Laundries all over the country, north and south, but that is where the mass grave was found, and I thought there could be people who were going to come before they even see the film and they're going to think that I was exploitative. I was prepared for that, but thus far, no, I've only had good responses. I had a couple of women who travelled. One woman came all the way from Cork at the bottom of Ireland up to Belfast at the top of Ireland, who had been in a Magdalene Laundry, and she came solely because it didn't go into cinemas in the Republic of Ireland, which is funny because I think there's an obvious local interest, but yeah, that didn't happen, so maybe that's something to do with it, I don't know. But anyway, she came all the way up because there was nowhere else she could see it. And that was like a preview screening in Belfast, and she came by herself on a bus. She'd never been to Belfast before, and she spoke at the end and she was really very moved and affected by the film, and that was important. And then there was another woman who'd come over from Anna to see the film the same night, and she stood up as well and said, yeah, me too, I was one of these people as well. So that was very meaningful to me. Then I haven't heard a peep from the church. I thought that they might say something, or I was prepared for it to happen. But I'll tell you that I've never met a priest who didn't like horror films. They love horror films because it validates their faith, you know. But every time I meet a priest, wedding or whatever, it always comes up, oh, horror film, and then they'll say, I love horror films. You know, my favourite film is The Exorcist, of course.
Anyways, the spaces that you found were like super spooky and cool, but like they seem very important to the story. So I was like curious how you planned that. So like, did you know where you were going to be filming, or whenever like you got to the space, did you have to rework things in the script, or like did you find problems like being in a space like so old, like with outlets and stuff?
I think there was parts of it. There were actually parts of it that were tweaked to location. So the script happened first, and even I think concurrently, because the whole process was very tight. From Northern Ireland Screen saying we're going to give you the money, at that point it was just a slim treatment. But they wanted to invest in me, and they wanted to invest in Martin, who was the producer. So they said, we're going to trust you guys. And I think they had a bit of money they had to get rid of, like a tax thing or something, I don't know. But we had 6 months basically to make the whole film, write the script, everything, you know, shot, not the post-production, but within 6 months from that one page, it was all shot, so it was all very contracted. And I think as I was writing, John Leslie, the location manager, was going out, finding places, and some stuff was tweaked to the locations. So it was kind of, a lot of it was in tandem.
Were you like crawling through the catacombs, being like, "Oh, this is a great spot for like a station"? Like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, creepy place. That's what you want in a horror film, right?
Thank you so much. This was a really great conversation. Thank you for bringing the film, and we look forward, for those who are coming, to having more of a conversation with you tomorrow.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, guys.